I love synchronicity when two events that have no relationship but seem like they should come up at the same time. I was absorbing the latest Pope news while checking out something. This sounds like a setup, but I swear this was the timing. While checking out a St. Louis Cardinals story concerning Branch Rickey from 1922. Popes, Cardinals, right? And I'm looking for Branch, a Methodist, not a Catholic, and down the page, across from the obituary of pitcher George Cuppy, who had one of the worst nicknames of all time. He had a dark complexion, you see, was this item: baseball may become Italy's national game. Well, that was 103 years ago, as basic math tells us, and as far as I know, it hasn't happened yet, so I thought I would delve further. The article began, baseball, encouraged by Pope Pius XI, may become Italy's national game, according to Edward L. Hearn, European Commissioner of the Knights of Columbus, who has just returned after inaugurating the organization's welfare work in Rome. The Pope is eager to have American sports introduced into Italy, Mr. Hearn declared. Yes, that's always a big priority for popes. I mean, maybe now that we have an American pope, a pope who is or was apparently a White Sox fan in his Chicago past, maybe that will actually be true, but I doubt it was true then. As I said, we're still waiting on it. Very few major leaguers have been born in Italy. Alex Leedy of the Mariners, a third baseman, played sporadically in the big leagues from 2011 to 2013. He's the most recent one. He's still active in the Mexican League, just like Tom Berenger in the first Major League film. Maybe he even has a Rene Russo of his very own. Leedy had a huge season at High Desert in the California League. Honestly, it's more accurate to say that he had a huge season in the desert rather than at the desert, because that team, that environment, Adelanto is the town in the Mojave Desert, home of the black-tailed jackrabbit and the jackrabbit baseball. Something about the dry air or the elevation or both just inflates everyone's stats, hitters anyway. Well, I guess it inflates pitcher stats in a sense too. 30 years ago, High Desert was a Padres affiliate, and for a hot minute, if you'll pardon the expression, desert, hot, you get it, because I was just a naive lad, I didn't realize just how much the statistics of high desert players had to be discounted. So for just a second, I didn't realize that young players like Jay Gaynor and Matt Mieske were hitting in zero gravity, so I saw their stats and I was excited. Mieske hit .342 with a .456 on-base percentage and a .531 slugging percentage there in 1991, and I thought, wow, gee, finally a second Padres bat to back Tony Gwynn. He did make the majors. He never played for them. The Padres traded him to the Brewers for Gary Sheffield at a time when young Gary was trying to play his way out of Milwaukee and succeeded, and it was a very reasonable thing to do. The Brewers had him in the majors, Mieske, not Sheffield, for about 5 years, and then he played sporadically elsewhere. He was a right-handed right fielder who hit only .262 with a .318 on base, .434 slugging, wasn't Roberto Clemente in the outfield, so he doesn't sound super valuable, but he did contribute a bit because although he couldn't hit same-side pitching, he killed left-handers, averaging .306, .362, .551 against them, and I promise you there are some right-handed Hall of Famers who don't have splits like that against southpaws. Give me that guy as a platoon DH right now, and I don't have to have any sandwiches. I don't know what that means. I guess, Mom, if you buy me this platoon DH, I won't ask you for any sandwiches for a month. Okay, but you'll be the one responsible for feeding him and taking care of him and picking up after him? You know platoon DHs, they claw the furniture. One difference between Mieske and Liddy at High Desert is that the former was already 23 years old for High A, so there wasn't a lot to project if you didn't believe in the stats, which of course you shouldn't have. Liddy was only 20 when he hit .345, .411, .594, with 23 home runs in 129 games, so at least you could say, well, he has time to be more than just a desert tortoise. A couple of years later, he hit 30 home runs at AAA Tacoma. Did I say Tacoma correctly? You know, I briefly was in a long-distance relationship with a young woman from Seattle, and I knew next to nothing about Washington State, and at some point I referred to the city of Spokane, and she said, Spokane? It's Spokane, you ignoramus, and I should have realized that the relationship was doomed right then. I had just never, at that age, heard the name of the town spoken out loud. How could she not know, given the average American's knowledge of geography, that she was lucky to have a boyfriend who could name more than one city in her state, that could name her state? I deserved a medal, I think. So Liddy was good at Tacoma, not just at high desert, and that seemed to make the case that he really was a prospect, at least a little, because he also struck out 170 times. And the problem, ultimately, was that the tortoise had a better chance of making consistent contact than he did. At the big league level, he swung at everything, took nothing, and therefore couldn't get to that power requiring you to lay the bat on the ball from time to time. He got 188 major league plate appearances and averaged .208 with a .266 on-base percentage and a .370 slugging percentage with 6 home runs. If you prorate that over about 500 plate appearances, you get 16 homers, 35 walks, and nearly 200 strikeouts. Since Liddy wasn't Brooks Robinson in the field, there was no reason to keep giving him chances in the hopes that he might back into 25 home runs, say, and a 300 on-base percentage. The Mariners had already had that player, Jim Presley, and how great was that experience? The answer is it was okay while it lasted, but it didn't last that long because consistency often eludes that sort of player. Reno Bertoia, birth name Pierino Peter Bertoia, who came up with the Tigers in 1953, was born in San Vito al Tagliamento in northern Italy, just a short hop from present-day Slovenia, home of the Whopper and the short-toed eagle. I learned such wonderful things doing this show, and I hope you do too. The short-toed eagle, which always has trouble finding shoes that fit, swoops down on a snake and then flies away while slurping up the serpent like it was a rogue strand of spaghetti. So if he flies east, that's bad manners, but if he flies west, it's just what we do around here. Bertoia made the majors at 18 not because he earned it with great play in the minors, but because he was a bonus baby. He signed for more than $4,000 or so, and as punishment, the Tigers had to roster him for 2 years or risk losing him. It was a dumb way of trying to rein in prospect bonuses in that it punished both the players and the teams, but that's the story of baseball. Bertoia actually grew up in Canada, and that's how he got to be a ball player. It was years before he got a chance to play regularly. So like a lot of bonus babies, he suffered stagnation and didn't show much when he got into the lineup. There's no way of knowing what he might have been had the Lords of Baseball not been so obtuse. Now, not every bonus baby was harmed in this way. Al Kaline, one of Bertoia's teammates, and Harmon Killebrew were punished in exactly this way and got through it. But it's reasonable to say that this practice was mostly pernicious. So yeah, Italy, not the hotbed of baseball talent the Knights of Columbus were projecting. When I was young, I remember being at Yankee Stadium during the brief flowering of Rick Cerrone. If you weren't keeping track, it spanned the second half of the 1980 season, and then he followed it with over 900 games of hitting .245, .303, .332. But for that one moment, folks were excited. It was in the immediate aftermath of Thurman Munson's death, and Yankees fans thought, hey, we've got a great catcher again, and held up signs saying, I saw these, really, Italian stallion. Wishful thinking. Oddly, the Knights of Columbus ended up owning the land under Yankee Stadium for about 20 years. As for Pius XI, he was a rookie pontiff at that moment, having just come into his cassock in February 1922. Not only did Pius XI not launch baseball in Italy, he cooperated with the fascists, both at home and on the road, securing the creation of Vatican City as an independent state by making a deal with Mussolini. And then he also signed a deal with the Germans in 1933 that helped clear the way for the Nazis to take over by binding the local church not to speak out against their atrocities. He died in 1939, so it was his successor, Pius XII, who got to deal more directly with the Holocaust and the effects of World War II. That's still controversial. far more controversial than Pius XI's stance on baseball. From the book The Pope and Mussolini, The Secret History of Pius XI and the Rise of Fascism in Europe, by David Kurtzer, I quote, "The Pope soon realized that his, quote, pact with the devil, as the church historian Hubert Wolff has described it, was not going to turn out the way he hoped. At the same time they signed the Concordat, the Nazis introduced their law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring, which mandated the forced sterilization of those deemed defective, in clear contrast with church doctrine. Hitler also began moving against the church's dense network of parochial schools. The Nazis wanted a church they could fully control. In the early fall, the Vatican Secretary of State office produced an alarming analysis of these efforts. It included the text of a song popular in the Hitler Youth, calling Hitler their Redeemer. In October, the editor of Italy's most prominent Catholic newspaper warned that the Nazis were working toward a German national church in which Protestants and Catholics are to be mixed together. In December, in his annual Christmas address to the cardinals, Pius XI voiced his disappointment with the Nazi government. While the Pope's doubts about Hitler were growing, those closest to him were trying to keep relations as harmonious as possible. In early 1934, both Cardinal Pacelli and the papal nuncio in Germany, Monsignor Cesare Orsino, cautioned the Pope against saying anything that would anger Hitler, lest it further undermine the Church's position. You win some, you lose some, but you got yours, so don't upset the big baby with the tanks and the guns. It's not like he's contravening our values or anything, and you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. The eggs being the poor, the helpless, the victims of a state gone mad. Same as it ever was, everywhere, except in that gray and foggy refuge we know as the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show, The Infinite Inning. You know it, number 329 in an ongoing series. I am, as always, your convivial host, Stephen Goldman, for this trip, in which we attempt to understand the present via a trip to the past. As I speak these words, the San Diego Padres are playing at Colorado and trying very hard to blow a 13-2 eighth inning lead. I really hope they don't do that, not because I'm rooting against the Rockies exactly, but because our story in the second act springboards from the Rockies' historically poor start. And if they somehow win this one 14-13, it will have to be some sort of dramatic walk-off, and I feel like it will ruin my plans. It'll put a damper on them, certainly for this entire episode, or at least the second act, if they do that. As we wait in suspense for what may be an on-the-fly rewrite, I will ask how we are all doing here in the twilight days of the Republic. Have you got your go bag packed? I know that sounds really paranoid, but today, the power behind the throne, one of the people who are actually doing the running of things, I don't even want to say his name, was speculating about canceling the right of habeas corpus, one of our fundamental freedoms, because in his view, we are being invaded, a concept that they've already tried out a bunch of times. It has been invalidated by a number of courts. But of course, if you've already been sent off to some gulag in El Salvador or Libya, they've been trying that too. Or even, heaven forfend, Spokane, a place that doesn't really exist except in our imaginations. It's going to be very hard for you to get back, especially as in the case of one unfortunate fellow, they've denied they have the power to do that. I really thought about telling this story this week, which has nothing to do with baseball, but during Theodore Roosevelt's administration, an American, at least we think he was an American, he might not have been, he might have been a Greek national, it's kind of complicated, but everyone felt he was an American at the time, a guy named Ian Perdicaris. He was a wealthy American living in retirement in Morocco, and he was kidnapped. He and his stepson, who was a British national, were kidnapped by a terrorist who called himself the Rasooli. Naturally, this upset President Roosevelt and his Secretary of State, Johnny Hay, who in a prior lifetime had been one of Lincoln's secretaries. He was also a writer. He had co-authored with Lincoln's other primary assistant a multi-volume biography of the president, and he was also a novelist. This came into play later. First, Roosevelt sent a good chunk of the Navy and parked it on the coast of Morocco. And yet the Moroccan government was slow to negotiate the release or the rescue of Perdicaris. And Roosevelt said to Johnny Hay, we've got to take care of this. And presidents delegate, as you know. And so Hay said, I need something really punchy, some kind of really striking phrase that will explain our position to the Moroccan government and get them off their butts and moving towards resolving this situation and rescuing this American citizen. And being a writer, he kicked around a couple of different drafts, asked people what they thought, and he finally boiled it down to this sentence, which is sometimes credited to President Roosevelt himself, who also wrote, but it was actually Johnny Hay. What he said, what he cabled to the Moroccan government was, the United States wants Perdicaris alive or Rasooli dead. And with a good chunk of the Navy parked outside of the country, and of course a lot of Marines on those ships, and a lot of cannons pointed at the Moroccan coast, the Moroccans figured that the United States meant business. They met the Rasooli's demands, and Perdicaris got back home. And so every time our current Republican administration makes these lame-ass excuses not to return this fellow from El Salvador because they don't want to. I mean, let's be straight about that. But when they say they're helpless to do it, I think of a prior American administration from 121 years ago, which made their desires clear and effectuated the release of a citizen. It's really weird when impotence is a choice and is advertised as a strength. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Speaking of impotence, pursuant to that last note on Pope Lando Calrissian's deal with Hitler and the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring, our current Department of Health and Human Services, under RFK Stadium Jr., most of the time a stadium is an empty building with a hole in the middle, so it seems appropriate, is presently using our Medicare and Medicaid data to compile a registry, a list of all people diagnosed with autism in America. Maybe that will be used well and honorably, and maybe it won't, so it's better that it doesn't exist. All I do know is that in the future, should someone even more insane, more eugenicist in their thinking than RFK Stadium Jr. decides that the autistic community needs to be sent to some kind of summer camp for their own good, all those ICE agents, having depopulated the country of anyone who they don't like, will have a lot of spare time and very few targets. Talking about them puts me in mind of a line in Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' The Watchmen, which says, justice, like the hawk, must sometimes go masked in its self-evidently fascist self-justification, even in the context of, or especially in the context of that graphic novel. And here in the real world, it's even worse. It's Klan-like behavior. There's nothing American except a very specific kind of American from a very specific time and place who kidnap people from their homes without due process and hide their identities while doing so. It's now 13-9 Padres in the bottom of the ninth, and there's a runner on, and I'm getting kind of twitchy. There's only one out. Earlier this week, the Pirates fired their manager, Derek Shelton. He seems like an innocent bystander to a really awful group of players, but if you can prove that he had something to do with the fact that nearly every position player their farm system produces reaches the majors and just kind of evaporates, like someone dehydrates them down to kind of a powder, at which point they just blow away, then I suppose it's justified. Was he the one holding them back? Was he really mean to them? Was he mocking them and pointing out their inadequacies before every at-bat? Hey, O'Neill, don't swing at that changeup this time. Ha, ha, ha. There have been managers like that, as perverse and counterproductive as that might have been. Was Derek Shelton the one who took O'Neill Cruz off of shortstop, where he wasn't very good, and moved him to center field, which he plays like a man who is lost at sea and trying to swim for shore, only he doesn't know what direction land is. Shelton had, fractionally, the lowest winning percentage of anyone to manage the Pittsburgh Pirates for more than 3 seasons. He had a .410 winning percentage, which leaves him just under Billy Meyer, who ran the team from 1948 to 52 and had a .412. Billy, as I believe we've discussed before, won the Sporting News Manager of the Year award, which used to mean something, in 1948, when the Pirates had a surprise winning season. They didn't win anything, not a pennant or anything. They just showed up for once. The winning record was a fluke, achieved in part due to a pitching staff that was so old that it couldn't do it again the next year. They dropped off to 71 and 83 in 1949, while Casey Stengel, whose Yankees had the surprise season that year, won the award. Seeing Meyer at the winter meetings, Casey said, "Isn't it funny, Bill, how all of a sudden I got so smart and you got so dumb?" Which really does get at the unfair way that managers are often rated and reviewed, but oh so rarely subscribed to. Meyer might have lasted longer than he did, but the Pirates were so bad at that time that he burned out. Branch Rickey's youth movement, which took forever to pay off in the 1960 championship, was so hard on Meyer that he quit with 2 games left. In the 1952 season, that Pirates team would go 42 and 112. "I've had enough," he said. "I just couldn't stand being with this team any longer. These kids we have now just can't do it. If there was a foreseeable future to the club, I wouldn't mind sticking it out. Everyone likes to manage a winning ball club, but this one is hopeless." We all feel that way sometimes. Best of luck to Derek Shelton in finding a winning ball club of his own to run. This week at Baseball Prospectus, I wrote about RBIs and an editor of olden days who tried to force me to use them. He had a psychological need for RBIs to indicate something about character and tried to make that my problem. In this life, there are things that are true, things that are false, and then there's a special category of things that some of us, each of us perhaps, we really, really want and need to be true, or sometimes false. We don't get our way most of the time, but a few of us try to compensate for this upsetting us by suppressing the information that they disagree with. They don't try to prove it wrong because they can't. They just insist they're right, and then they go out and burn the books that say that they're wrong, or delete the web pages. That's what this story is about, except it's also about the 1985 Yankees and the fantastic seasons put together by Don Mattingly and, may he rest in peace, Rickey Henderson. I do hope you'll check that out and let me know what you think. Those of you who subscribe to the show also probably saw that I put out the first reissue episode, number 145 was it, from about 5 years ago, revisiting Shufflin' Phil Douglas, as I promised to do last week. So between the two of them, you have some different views of Shufflin' Phil, not to mention Bugs Raymond and some other difficult old giants and other players who tended to get chased by detectives because their teams didn't trust them to stay sober and moral. I put a new introduction on the show that was fun to do, talking about some contemporary things, and I will probably continue to do that. It's good to talk to you more than once a week if you can stand it. So I hope, even if the episode seems familiar to you, that you'll at least check out the new stuff. That went up on Wednesday, and it's my goal to have them up that day weekly from now on. As for this episode, it's time for us to take a wee break. As always, on the other side, Act 2 of the show, as I suggested before, I want to turn to the historic start by the 2025 Colorado Rockies versus the 1932 Boston Red Sox, and look at both of them in the hands of the world economy and the President of the United States. Drum roll, please. Hail to the chief. Yes, he's wrecking all our ball clubs. As a writer type person, I have all kinds of ideas, and some of them are relevant to what I'm working on right at that very moment. So into the soup they go, but others seem applicable to some other project, which is temporarily on a back burner. So I file them in the appropriate places. And some of them just seem kind of fun and don't seem to apply to anything, but I write them down and hope they'll be meaningful. But every once in a while, I pile up so many of them that I lose track of what I meant. And as I'm recording this episode, I just picked up what I thought was a piece of scrap paper to make some notes for the rest of the show. And I see that I wrote down Bus Paladin on it. And I don't know what I was thinking. Perhaps a fantasy novel about a fella who is both a warrior and a regular commuter. It's entirely possible. And it just goes to show you how cheap ideas are. Everyone worries that someone's going to steal my idea. I'm sure it happens. I know it happens. But most of the time, ideas are not in short supply, especially if your idea begins with a rogue cop, a corrupt police force. Then your idea is not really even an idea. What's in short supply is commitment to that idea, execution, and finishing. I include myself in that indictment. I've finished a number of books, as you know, but I've also started a whole bunch that I haven't finished. And I'll be honest with you, there's one that I wrote, and yes, it's a baseball story, but I wrote it too long and too shaggy, and I've needed to revise it and trim it down, and I made a few efforts at that, and I stalled out, in part because I tried so hard to fix it that I kind of broke it for myself. And I got fed up and distracted and moved on to other things, and I regret it because that story was close to my heart. When I go to sleep at night and before I fall asleep, I keep myself awake by counting all my failures. That's one of them, and I need to get it off that list somehow. So let me revise what I said before. Finishing is hard. Revision is harder. Finishing a book for the third time, that's super hard. At least it is for me. Maybe I'm just not meant to do this. Turning now to your 2025 Colorado Rockies, who did lose that game I was sweating a few minutes ago, and are now 6-32 on the season. They have always been poorly run, and I would like to argue, albeit without thinking too hard about it, that they were poorly run even when they wild-carded their way into a World Series loss back in 2007. Getting to be a long time ago, 2007. They went 90-73 that year, which was nice. One of the weakest words, nice, along with interesting. Do you like this thing I cooked for you? Do you like this painting I painted? How did you enjoy my new novel? It was interesting. The Rockies have been around, 32 years, and have had only 3 90-win seasons, including the one I just mentioned. The Rays, who were born 5 years later, have had 1 100-win season, 8 90-win seasons, and also 1 World Series. The Rockies have hit bigger on star players in some way. They drafted Todd Helton, Troy Tulowitzki, Trevor Story, Charlie Blackmon, Nolan Arenado. They signed Ubaldo Jimenez out of the Dominican Republic. The Rays have had a lot less success with that sort of player. They drafted Evan Longoria, Carl Crawford, Kevin Kiermaier, David Price, James Shields, Blake Snell. I guess the legend of Shane McClanahan is still being written, or will be if he ever gets back on the field. The Rays list is maybe a deeper list with players who have a wider variety of talents, but it's not as splashy a list. I'd imagine that park effects have a lot to do with that, but it does seem like a useful indicator that no Ray has ever finished ever. Did I miss someone? Higher than 6th in the MVP voting. Evan Longoria finished 6th twice, and Yandy Diaz got that much support once when he won the batting title back 2 years ago, 2023. They've had deeper rosters with a lot of very good players. Think of Ben Zobrist, but they haven't found their Junior Griffey, their Mike Trout, their Aaron Judge, the generational rug who really ties the room together. The Rockies had Larry Walker win the award in 1997. Matt Holliday finished 2nd one year. Ellis Burks 3rd in another. Nolan Arenado was up there 4 times. Carlos Gonzalez 3rd in 2010. They've been flashier. Again, some of that is the park, but some of it is also the choices they made along the way. And you might say, But yeah, what about pitching at altitude? That's a handicap the Rays don't have to have. And no, they don't. But the Rockies have licked that problem from time to time. That World Series club had very good pitching, especially in the bullpen. You might remember 2018, when the rotation included a few pitchers who were still there, but no longer achieving at the same level. Herman Marquez, Kyle Freeland, Tyler Chatwood, Antonio Senzatela, which is always fun to say, and John Gray, with Greg Holland saving 41 games as the closer. Adjust for Park, and they had one of the best pitching staffs in the league. They had done it. They had found their holy grail. The problem was that they had neglected to build much of a lineup outside of Blackmon and Arenado, so they won only 87 games and finished third. They did get into the playoffs via a wildcard spot, but unlike 2007, that run didn't last. They exited immediately. That was their second year of having Ian Desmond on a 5-year, $70 million contract that made no sense when it was signed and made less and less sense by the minute over the next 3 years. So far this year, all of the Rockies' sins have found them out. They have easily the worst offense in baseball, hitting going into Friday evening's game, the one that made me so tense, .211 with a .280 on base percentage and a .340 slugging percentage as a team. This is totally unfair, but pitcher Wes Farrell hit .280, .351, .446 for his career. But you really don't need to contrast the Rockies with a pitcher to realize that .211, .280, .343 is really, really bad. The pitching has not been as close to the level of historically awful, but it's also been far from good. As I said, as I speak these words, their record is now 6-32. Here's another historic comparison that is, well, it actually seems more fair to me. At the same point in their season, the 1899 Cleveland Spiders were 8-30. In terms of the modern era, the Rockies have now tied the 1988 Baltimore Orioles for the worst start ever. You'll recall that the 88 Orioles began the season with 21 consecutive losses. Viewed in that light, the fact that they dropped only 107 games in total is almost disappointing. They had achieved a kind of perfection, but they got better as the season went on. I don't really feel bad about that. I'm sorry in a way that we missed out on a historical event, but on the other hand, those guys really seem to be suffering, especially Cal Ripken Sr., who had been in the organization since approximately 1793, finally got his chance to manage, and the roster he was given was so bad. But not only was it bad, it underachieved in a way that, shouldn't be possible. 0-21 is the equivalent of a coin just coming up tails over and over and over again, even though some of the time it should come up heads. And it finally did change, but not until after Cal Sr. had been replaced by Frank Robinson. And it was also good to see Robinson get another chance, and he certainly had a long run in his second act as manager. It shows you how cruel life can be. The 88 Orioles never reached good, but if you're starting from zero, then winning a third of your games the rest of the way is an almost incalculable improvement. They even went 14-15 that August, which is a very ordinary Jejune sort of losing, and that's how they avoided being historic. Outside of the 0-21, The Rockies may very well change in that same way, but as with the Orioles, it won't remove the underlying facts that have produced this roster. The record will almost certainly be bad no matter what. If they play at 500 the rest of the way, they'll finish with 68, 69 wins. To lose only 100 games, they'll have to go 56-68 the rest of the way, which is about a 450 pace, about equivalent to winning 74 games over a full season. Whatever they do, it will be a different sort of accomplishment from that of the Orioles, who had at minimum 2 Hall of Famers and 3 good to great players still in the midst of their career in pitcher Mike Boddicker, first baseman Eddie Murray, and shortstop Cal Ripken Jr. And yet we're still horrible. During that season, they made trades that turned Boddicker into Brady Anderson and Curt Schilling, which was a very good deal, and dispatched Fred Lynn to the Tigers for Chris Hoyles, another one that paid off unexpectedly well, although Hoyles didn't have that long a career. That December, they dealt Murray to the Dodgers for Juan Bell, Brian Holton, and Ken Howell, which was a very bad deal and pretty easily first guessed at the time. On the other hand, they didn't keep Howell. They immediately flipped him to the Phillies for Phil Bradley, who was very good for them for a year, and then they traded him out again, so maybe it wasn't a total loss. It doesn't seem like the Rockies have anything like that to trade. They presently have a team without stars and without a whole lot of veterans. Ryan McMahon is a very good glove at third, so maybe a team that is utterly bereft at that position might take him, but he doesn't hit. He's a career .241, .323, .419 hitter, which is nothing, especially when you take Denver into account. He's a career .216, .304, .362 hitter on the road, and whereas a number of ex-Rockies have shown that they can adjust and be better than you might have expected, just how much better than a .650 OPS can you expect a 30-year-old to be? He's also signed for 2 more years at $16 million a pop, so maybe the Yankees ought to hang fire. Even the 1932 Boston Red Sox, who Rob Maines and I named the most dominated team in baseball history last year, were a game better at the equivalent point in their season. They finished 43 and 111. If they played at that same pace over 162 games, they would have gone 44 and 118. The Rockies' current pace, which is impossible, is 26 and 136. It has to change. All it would really take is one player coming out of his coma. Michael Toglia has been hitting a bit lately. That might be enough to change a 150 team into a 350 team. Seriously, maintaining extremes in baseball, losing that many games is like the mirror universe version of Joe DiMaggio hitting in 56 straight. Whatever that version is, he has a beard and a mustache and hits into a double play every time out, even if no one is on base. It's really hard to do. That's why when you look at Pacoda heading into Friday's game, it figures they're only going to lose 115. Baseball Reference's version figures them for 108 losses, and the worst case scenario as 117 losses. That's prior, again, to Friday night's loss. And to continue with the Star Trek analogy, beyond that is where no man has gone before, or at least no man who didn't play for the 1962 Mets or last year's White Sox. You might wonder why the 1932 Boston Red Sox were that bad. What kind of neglect did they suffer compared to the Rockies, who just seemed to be unburdened by anything like expectations? Well, the Red Sox weren't trying either, but they could not try. The ownership group had failed, imploded. It had really failed from almost day one. In August 1923, J.A. Robert Quinn, known as Bub, headed a group that bought the remains of the franchise from Harry Frazee, who, as you know, had given away most of it. The players, I mean. Just little things like Babe Ruth. Bob had just built the Browns into a very good team, albeit sort of a one-season wonder. There's a really fun story about that. Do you know this one? The Browns went 93 and 61 and finished 1 game behind the New York Yankees. Cut to Philadelphia, where Connie Mack has been talked into giving a 28-year-old semi-pro pitcher named Adolph Rettig in the encyclopedias as Otto a chance to pitch in the big leagues. This would never happen today the way it happened then. Mack said, "Sure, come to the park and try out." That happened. That's one of the things that he was willing to do. Rettig said, my stuff only shows up in real games. Pitch me or forget it. Incredibly, Mack said, "Yeah, all right, come pitch against the Browns." He started the game and showed stuff that wasn't fit for a beer league, but somehow he won. He held the Browns to 3 runs over 9 innings while the A's scored about 6. Mack gave him a few other chances, but that one game turned out to be a fluke, the sole victory of Otto Rettig's career. And it wouldn't be worth mentioning, except that, as I said, the 1922 Browns lost the pennant by 1 game. Now, just for the record, they lost 60 other games as well, including and especially 14 of the 22 they played against the Yankees. And yes, that one game stands out, but you could also point to the day the Yankees beat them 14-5 behind Babe Ruth and Wally Pipp home runs. The Rettig loss is one of those fluke things that happen in the course of a season, but so is Babe Ruth bashing your ace over the head with long balls. However you want to slice it, Rettig was among the reasons that Bob Quinn's best chance to win a pennant went by the wayside. Now, his Red Sox died because even though he got to own 2 teams, the other being the Braves, he didn't have the cash to do it well. Now, Bill Veeck was like that too. He was always the front man for a group of owners who had more cash than he did. His skill was that those half dozen guys, say half dozen, liked him enough and trusted him enough that they felt safe coalescing around him and putting their money into his venture. And it was Veeck who brought them together individually. They were just 6 guys with cash. They weren't going to seek each other out and become the super friends of baseball. When Veeck connected them through himself, they became a force for justice, or at least for Cleveland. Quinn's partners weren't as reliable. They had an odd habit of dying on him. And we'll get to that right after this brief intermission. Stay safer than they did, okay? Quinn's major backer in 1923 was Indiana glass manufacturer Palmer Winslow. He died. That's not surprising. I mean, so did Bob Quinn, Otto Rettig, and Babe Ruth eventually. But Winslow died before Quinn could write checks on his accounts. What seems odd about that is the timing. Winslow didn't leave the building until 1927, so there should have been time for Quinn to buy perhaps a bunch of promising Pacific Coast leaguers. I think what happened, and this is a supposition on my part, is that Winslow sickened years before he died. That part is not a supposition, and effectively stopped communicating with Bob. You know how, not too many years before that point, when Woodrow Wilson had his stroke after the Versailles Conference, his wife Edith became his gatekeeper and made a lot of decisions for him. She would say, hold on, I'll ask him, and then just sit there for a second and then come back and say that he said yes or no. I think that might have happened with Quinn and Mrs. Winslow, except Mrs. Winslow made sure that he said no more often than not. I can imagine Quinn phoning or sending a telegram like, Mr. Palmer, stop. Have deal for Rogers Hornsby. Stop. Please wire $150,000. Stop. Love, Bob. And Mrs. Winslow wiring back, Mr. Quinn, stop. I say that because once Palmer did check out of the Planet Earth Hotel, the Whittier Winslow wanted to sell out. Now Bob Quinn had a choice. He could sell the team, give the Whittier Winslow her share of the proceeds, and be done with the whole Boston Red Sox experience, or he could keep the team by going deep into debt to buy her out without selling it. He chose the latter course. And the thing is, it could have worked, except that, among many other things, the world economy was winding down, even then, over a year before the Wall Street crash. One of the things that happens in a recession, when people get nervous, is debt deflation, which is to say, deflation driven by debt. When creditors tighten their belts, for one thing, they aren't open to refinancing your loan, they call it in. Worse, with prices falling, and in baseball terms, tickets going unsold, your ability to pay your debt gets further and further away with every hour. By 1932, when that worst ever team was on the field, the worldwide depression, exacerbated by, among other things, choking tariffs, was at its lowest point. The Red Sox drew 182,150 fans for the season, or not quite 2,400 hearty souls per game. And it's not that they didn't want to go out. and see Dale Moose Alexander and Smead Jolie smack the ball around, or for that matter, watch Jimmy Fox come to visit and pound the ball over the green monster. It's that they couldn't afford to do it. A moment ago, I said that tariffs had caused the situation. That's not the whole story. I've remarked on this many times in the show, but there are as many official causes of the Great Depression as there are leaves on any given tree. Now, I'm no economist, so the best I can do is read along and try to make sense of it all. And it seems to me that the economy of the late 1920s/early 1930s was like an Agatha Christie mystery or a Knives Out movie. The detective has found that 10 different people could plausibly have murdered the victim, and all 10 had the means, motive, and opportunity. Or it's a medical story in which the patient has 2 different cancers, kidney disease, and a heart condition. Oh, and worms. Which one killed him? Does it really matter? The guy was surrounded, and it seems to me the Depression was like that. It was like a duck hunt in which one single duck was surrounded by 100 hunters, all of whom had their gun pointed in the same direction. All of the explanations sound good, and none of them seem mutually exclusive. Let me see if I can do this. I'm going to try this more or less off the top of my head, and those of you who are more educated than I am can tell me where I'm off. It seems that the United States came out of the First World War as the world's creditor, that we were awash in cash. Borrowing was very cheap, and the stock market was hot, so everyone was buying stuff, including equities, on credit. We also had a ton of industrial capacity, so we were knocking out cars and radios by the dozen, except that the factories were increasingly automated, so they didn't generate as many jobs as you might have expected, and wages were stagnant. Also, unions were still being suppressed, so workers couldn't bargain for higher wages, and due to Jim Crow, we had this whole subordinated population of African Americans who couldn't afford to buy cool things either, because the world was broke and a lot of big countries were devaluing their currency so as to get back on the gold standard, which is to say to have enough rocks to redeem all or most of their cash. There was nowhere for us to send all the excess cars and radios, so they just sat there. Deep breath. The radios gathered dust. Factories cut back. More workers lost their jobs. Somewhere in there, the entire breadbasket of the country dried up and all the topsoil blew away. A good chunk of the country was not yet electrified, so those sections stagnated too. Oh, I forgot that agricultural prices were down. Deflation is really bad for farmers because they borrow money to get their crops in, and if the money they spend to buy the seeds and the tractors is worth more than the money they get back from selling their tomatoes, they're going to be in debt forever. That's why, as the Depression deepened, on one hand you had people who were starving, and on the other hand you had farmers dumping gallons of perfectly good milk on the highway as a form of protest at those low prices. People started to sense that the economy was wobbling and started hoarding their money instead of spending it. Banks, doing the same, called in their loans, and brokerages, who were loaning out $9 for every $10 of stock, made margin calls. Money just stopped circulating. The Federal Reserve raised interest rates to keep gold in the country, an unforced error that further constricted the supply of money. Congress passed a big tariff, which further choked international trade, and everything stopped. The president was in the hands of Herbert Hoover, who had won the office in part because everyone said, he's a businessman. For the first time in our history, we'll have a president who really knows how capitalism works, who knows how to make the deals that'll keep this nation strong. And maybe that was true. But he was a very limited thinker, and he had that weird old American idea that helping someone in need was equivalent to giving them a handout, and that by doing so you made them dependent, and they would be ashamed, embarrassed, emasculated, and would lose the ability to bootstrap themselves back into the money as he had done, which he hadn't. He was an orphan in the sense that he had lost his parents, but he also had an uncle who was in real estate. More importantly, he struggled to get his head around the idea, he never really did get his head around the idea, that if something like 40 million men, women, and children in a country of 120 million at that time were hungry or underemployed or couldn't make the rent, that you could add up all the poor boxes in food pantries from all the churches in the country, and it wouldn't make a dent in the accumulated need. Simultaneously, His Treasury Secretary, Andrew Mellon, said that everyone needed to suffer because that would make them better people and it would purge the market of the elements that had overheated it. It was like an 18th century doctor bleeding his patient to cure his stomach cancer. You're barking up the wrong tree, Doc. And even if he wasn't, the cruelty was enormous. We are talking about starving or homeless children. And so everything stopped. We've talked about in this country how deleterious it was for our kids to have homeschool or remote school for the time that the pandemic was at its most intense. Those kids just didn't have school, period. Cities like Chicago said, sorry, we can't afford to pay the teachers. Go home, lads and lassies, you're on your own. And not that many years later, when World War II began and we had a draft and we started trying to induct young men into the service, young men who were kids back in the 1930s, we found so many cases of rickets and bad teeth and deficiencies that would never be corrected that go back to that time when so many Americans lacked the money to feed themselves or their children appropriately. But those were the children who were still around, the older people, the eldest people, who lacked the money to feed themselves appropriately. They just died prematurely. And all of this is why, subsequently, we had the forms of social safety net that we developed during the New Deal and the Great Society years. And then we forgot. Now, I've probably left out about a half dozen other causes of the Depression, but I'm not far off. And it seems like everyone who has ever studied this has wanted to find the big secret, the lone gunman who caused it all. I think it was all of the above. Probably I'm ignorant, but that's what makes sense to me. And somewhere, way down on the bottom of the pile of terrible consequences, one of which was the Second World War and another one was the Holocaust, was that Bob Quinn went broke running the Boston Red Sox, losing 90 to 111 games every single year because he couldn't borrow or raise the cash in a dying economy to staff the team with actual players. You can blame that, or you can just blame Palmer Winslow for dying when he did, or Mrs. Winslow for not wanting to back a baseball team once the old man was gone. Now, one great lesson here is that Tom Yawkey bought the team in 1933, started spending a lot of money because he had it to spare, but he couldn't win anything over the next 40-plus years either because it's not how much money you spend, but how you spend it. And then we're left, well, not with a lesson, but with a question. Where do the 2025 Rockies figure? It was Sam Clemens who said, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. The 1932 Red Sox were partially a product of the Great Depression, whereas the 2025 Rockies are a product of their own incompetence. The economic disaster wasn't inflicted on us until after they had declined to build a roster. They're at the beginning of the ride, as opposed to the 32 Sox who are at the end, or at least at the bottom of the trough. In other words, our current government has shot Palmer Winslow, our financial backer, and now we get to see how we do without him. There's no guarantee the Rockies will choose to dig out, but if they do decide to try and the money to achieve that is lacking, not just for them but for all of us, we'll know that Mark Twain was right. You know, I've written many stories about the Great Depression over the years, but I never thought I'd get a chance to live through the sequel. Should you follow me on social media, we can live through it together. You can do so at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. And there's a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook. I don't know why you would, but I'm there for you. Search on Infinite Inning and bang, you're there. Hey, let's talk. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/The Infinite Inning. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at teespring.com/store/The-Infinite-Inning. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please, how many times have I said this now? 330 times. Go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, why won't you do it? Why? Do you really want me to say it for a 331st time? Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring. Yes, we wrote it. As Dr. Rick said, with today's technology, we can do it as a samba, we can do it as a mambo, we can do it in the style of the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, but regardless, it's ours. So take your paws off my copyrights, you damn dirty ape. Well, noted liberal Charlton Heston was just invoked, and he still sounds like the raging conservative he became. So much of hostility is ruined when you develop empathy, but nevertheless, I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the infinite inning.